Okay, we're gonna get started. So for those who are like new today, we're gonna go over the game 87, game 1, and we're gonna talk about how to build worlds from this game so then we can use those worlds to answer our questions. So the way that I teach logic games is by using worlds. So I go through each rule, I eliminate it by creating different diagrams, and I use those diagrams to answer my questions. So I'm not having to think about rule 1 or rule 2 as I go through question 3 or something like that. I solely just rely on my diagrams as I do my questions. So we generally spend most of the time talking about the diagrams and how to build those up front. And then we'll go over the questions, which once we have our diagrams are going to become really easy. So we don't spend too much time on those. Any questions before we get started about the game? Okay, so we have participants in an experiment designed to evaluate the persuasive impact of expert witness testimony. Will be divided into 6 groups according to occupation. So we have judges, we have lawyers, medical doctors, nurses, police officers, and teachers. The 6 groups will be evaluated separately, one after the other, and then we have our rules. So given our paragraph, what kind of game would you say this is? You can blurt it out.
Ordering.
Yeah, it's ordering because we're trying to figure out who's going to be evaluated first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. The only reason why I asked that was because in our paragraph, it can get a little confusing because it talks about groups. And this is not a grouping game. We're not grouping our variables into different groups. The groups that they refer to in our paragraphs are just talking about our variables. In fact, this paragraph is super wordy to try to confuse you when really all it's doing is just giving us our variables and telling us that we're ordering them according to our our rules. Okay, so we're going to go through each rule individually. We're going to talk about it. We're going to think about our different options and how to build worlds off of that. So we're going to start with rule number 1, which says the teachers must be evaluated at some time before the medical doctors and some time before the nurses. Who wants to tell me how they would diagram this out, just as like a simple rule?
I would say, so I would just put T, then M. Oh, wait. Sorry.
So you got T before M, but there's like a second part to that rule. This rule kind of has like 2 rules in one. So take it part by part. So we know that T is going to be before M. What about N?
Teachers and medical doctors have to be before nurses.
So you're saying something like this?
Yeah. I was going to say, do I have to make a separate chain or I can just combine them all?
So we'll talk about combining, because we're going to combine some chains in this game. So we'll talk about combining stuff in a minute. Does anyone else have an idea of how they would diagram this?
I don't know if I should use the raise hand function, or I'm not sure if I can just jump in, but I think I would, so what I would do is like do T and then, so like how we have the first T dash M, I would do like a separate line. Like I wouldn't do M dash N because the M, like the M and N can come, like it doesn't matter their order. They just have to go, the T has to be before both of them. So just like have them separate because it doesn't say that, like, I feel like having them separate would represent the rule a little bit better, at least for like the way I would see it.
So like something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you can even like combine them if you want and have one T and do, that's how I would do it actually, would be to combine them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to talk about the first way that we diagrammed it. So this doesn't represent the rule in the way that it is written. So this actually represents T is before M is before N. But if we look at our rule, it just says T must be evaluated sometime before M. So yes, T is before M, and sometime before nurses. So technically, medical doctors and nurses have no like connection between them. The only thing that we care about is T is before both of them. So that's why this rule can be a little bit tricky, is because it's almost like we have two rules in one rule. And sometimes students can get a little overwhelmed with that because it's throwing it at you as one giant rule. But if you break it down part by part, it's a lot more sizable to attack. So if we broke it down part by part, we're looking at T is evaluated before M. I'm going to stop there because that's information that's I don't even know what word I'm looking for, but that's information that we need. T is before M. I'll write that out. I'll continue it and go, and it's sometime before nurses. Now that's a new piece of information. T is before nurses now. So that's where we can write it T-N up here. And what we were talking about earlier, that we can actually combine these two rules, is I have T showing up in two places. And when I have variables that repeat themselves, it means that I can combine them. So I can actually combine this to say T is before M and N. Think about it as if we're just like overlapping our T's without losing that connection between M and N. So one of the ways we can write this rule is actually T, I don't even know what that would be. It's just like dash M dash N. Does anyone have questions about that rule? Does it make sense?
I have a question more
Yeah.
about the way you the way you would draw it is if we do arrows, would that also be helpful instead of just to like avoid, I don't know if it's, do you find that people get confused often with like the direction of the rules, or does that matter as much? Like, I don't know if you get what I mean, but like, yeah, like, because I wonder if that matters, like if it's a tool that'll help reduce confusion, because I get confused quite often. So
the one thing I would say that this could be confusing is if you start going into logic reasoning and start learning about the C word, contrapositives and conditional statements. I hate those, hate them so much. I do not teach those in this class. We look at it a different way. But the formal way of writing those would be like, if I have T, then I'm going to have M. So if you start looking at the logic reasoning side of how to like diagram those conditional statements, they're going to be using an arrow. And so if you start using an arrow in your way that you write out your rules here, it's totally fine. It doesn't change the way that you're going to like interpret the rule, but just know it might get confusing because you might start to look at it that as, if I have T, then I'm going to have M and N. So you have like this different distinction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, thank you.
And I would say with the reading your direction sort of thing, the way that I teach it is, we are sharks. We don't move backwards. We always move forward. I feel like there's like a really cute saying in Nemo or something like that. So anyways, if we
like just keep swimming or something, like isn't it?
Yeah, I guess that's,
I don't know, but
just keep swimming. We don't turn around is basically what I'm saying. So if we're reading rule number 1, I'm starting at T because it's my first variable. I can only go forward. So T is before M. Now, because T has 2 branches off of it, I can return back to T and go a different route. You kind of think of it like a checkpoint if I have multiple branches off of it. But we can talk more about that because we'll start combining rules and we'll start having to read it a certain way. But we never go backwards. So I can't go M is before T or something like that. You could read it as T is after, or sorry, M is after T technically. But I always say go forward. It's a lot easier to read it that way. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. I think it'll become a little more clear when we start combining rules, because we'll start chaining stuff together and we'll have to talk about how to read that. So, okay, rule number 1, done. We don't have to think about that right now. Rule number 2 says medical doctors must be evaluated sometime before lawyers. So who wants to tell me how they would write this rule out? Anyone?
So I would say M then L.
Yeah. M is going to come before L. Perfect. That's how I would write it. Now, we have repeated variables. We kind of talked about this earlier. M is showing up in 2 of my rules, which means we can overlap and combine them together to create what I call Frankenstein rules. So that way we can combine rule 1 and rule 2 and not have to think about them individually, but we can think about them together. It's a lot easier to think about where your variables can go than when you're looking at like this big giant chain rather than a whole bunch of individual chains. So what we can do is we can take our M, overlap them. Actually, I'm going to see if I can do this. Overlap them. That kind of works. And we can just attach L onto the end. Then we don't have to think about rule 2 because it's already integrated into our first chain, our first diagram, basically. So you want to have questions about how I did that or why I did that? Okay. So that's rule 2. Rule 3 says the nurses must be evaluated either immediately before or immediately after the police officers. Who wants to tell me how they would diagram this one?
One thing, I'm not sure like the complete way I would, well, not sure, but one thing I would like note is that says the nurse must be evaluated immediately before or immediately after. So I would, instead of doing just like a line like N, N dash P, or like N dash P or like P dash N, I would maybe do like a box or something that would hold them together, just because it's different. Because my understanding is that like technically N could go like before M or before L, or like, whereas this now means that they have to be close together or they have to be next to each other.
Yes, so your understanding is completely correct. Rule number 1, or I'm going to refer to it as rule number 1, but our chain up here, rule number 1, we have these little dashes. Think of them like accordions, or I guess you could also say like a rubber band. You can put it as close together as possible, but you can also stretch them out as far apart as possible. So technically, we know that T has to be before N. It could be that spot 1 is T and spot 2 is N, but it could also be that spot 1 is T and spot 6 is N. So when we are told that something is immediately before or immediately after, placing a box around it and not using a dash is going to tell us that we can't pull that apart. It's in a box. They can't be stretched apart. So when we do look at our rule number 1, we can move these around so long as they're in their like abstract orders. M is before L, N is after T, but N and P are always going to be stuck together. Now you said that you would have N and P in a box or P and N in a box. Totally fine. That's visually helpful. A shorter way of writing it, very simple. Or I guess I would actually put it in here. An arc signifies that they can flip-flop between one another. So this and this mean the exact same. The only difference is you just have like a simpler way of writing it. But if you need to split it up to fully see that P could go technically before N, definitely diagram it this way so you're able to see that. But if you don't necessarily need that, you can do this little shorthand.
And those are called fixed positions, right? Something like that. It's the opposite of a floater. I know that.
They're called what?
Is it called like a fix? Like,
Oh, I thought you said like shixt, and I was like,
oh
I've
no,
never heard of that.
sorry, yeah,
Yeah,
fixed position. Okay,
they're fixed. We can't
okay,
move them
fixed.
apart.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
We can we'll talk about this as we start building worlds, but technically we can move them, we just can't move them apart. So like P and N can move down my line, but they just have to stay together in this box.
Got it.
Okay, don't have to worry about rule number 3 right now. All right, moving on to our next one. Number 4. Number 4 says the police officers must be evaluated at some time between the judges and the lawyers, regardless of whether the judges are evaluated before the lawyers or after. This is a lengthy rule. Who wants to take a stab and tell me how they would diagram this rule? You don't have to use the raise hand. That's totally fine. You can just blurt it out.
I think I would illustrate it similarly to, oh wait, what's the best way to, well, I would do almost like we did in the beginning. So P and then one, I guess, elastic band or one dash to L and then another dash to J, because my understanding is that it has to be evaluated at some time. Oh wait, sorry, between, not before. So actually, you could do the J on the other side of the P and then just like arrows between, like, yeah, back and forth.
Yeah.
I guess like, well, yeah. So you could technically then, I guess you're gonna go into this, but is it all like, would you keep those separate or would you put like 1 and 4 or would you put them together?
We'll talk about that. Yeah, definitely going to talk about that. But yes, this is a good way to indicate this rule because P is going to be between, good catch, has to be between, not before. So J and L flip-flopping between one another, but they're sandwiching P. And the way that we see that is J, it doesn't matter which order J and L are in, so long as P is between them, basically. Does anyone have questions on how we diagrammed that before I go into combining the rules? Okay.
I do have a question, sorry, really quick.
Yeah.
So technically, again, just to be sure, it's the same as like with world number 1, like the J and L can come basically anytime as long as P is between them. Like they don't have to be sandwiched together. They're not, I forget what she just said.
I know what you're saying. So like,
yeah,
we don't need something like this.
yeah.
Yes.
Like J could be 1 and L could be 6. Okay, perfect.
Yes, because we have those elastic bands, those stretchy chains. They can be pulled apart as much as possible. If they wanted it to be sandwiched together, like in a box, it would have said something like is immediately before or immediately after, but we don't care about the order or something like that. It'll tell you if it wants it to be sandwiched. I guess I should say like fixed. It'll tell you if it wants it to be that. But since it's not really caring, and it actually even says sometime, it's not giving me a specific order placement. Any other questions before we move on? Awesome. So we have some repeated variables. For one, we have P, and we also have N. Who wants to tell me how they would combine 2 of the rules? Or what they would do to combine the rules?
I mean, would we just do what you did, like kind of put them on top of each other, if that makes any sense, like you did earlier?
Yeah.
So you could do like N and P in a box together. I can let someone else answer the other one, but you could do like N and P, and I guess it could also look different ways depending on who does it, but like you could put N and P kind of on top as you did with the M and L. And then just make sure to keep your box together and like your arrow if you need that reminder.
Yes. And I also realized I forgot L. So yes, we're going to overlap our variables. When you see duplicate variables, just think about overlapping them. This is going to get a little tricky though, because we have N here, which is paired with P, but we also have L up here, which according to this chart up here has no connection to N and P. But down here, it forms that connection because we have to have P in between L. It can get very confusing. And honestly, I'm a little lost. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this in the most easy way that we can read this. If we know that P and N are boxed in together, they can't move around, I'm just going to put that in the diagrams. So I'm basically going to take rule 3 and shift it to rule 1 and shift it to rule 4. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have something like this. Stretch that out a little bit more. And then I'm going to do rule 1. So now I don't have to think about rule 3 because I've combined them into 2 of the rules. If it gets really overwhelming when you're combining rules, just pick 2 rules, combine them, and then kind of like chain it on as you go. So then I would look at world 1 and rule 4 and see how I can chain those together. It's basically what I'm saying. Don't try to do it all at once. That's a lot.
Sorry. Just a quick question, sorry. So just to double check to be sure, because I wouldn't have done this. So when you got rid of rule, was it 2? No, 3, N and P. So when we're getting rid of rules, we have to make sure that we first apply them to the other ones that we have, just like with like the regular way we would make rules. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, because
I can't just like add it to the one to world 1, but not to world 4.
I mean, you could. In this case, I think you'd be okay with it because you're gonna see, I think it was just P in rule 4. You're gonna see then that you have a duplicate. And this is gonna kind of happen. I just shifted it to those 2 rules because I noticed that there was duplicate variables and it's really just the box that we're looking at. So I'm just going to move a box into each of those rules so I can combine them. But ultimately what's going to happen is as you start chaining things together, especially in ordering games, everything's going to kind of come together in this big picture. So at some point you'll get to the correct diagram. I would just focus on rule by rule and one rule at a time, like combining 1 rule and 1 rule at a time to not overwhelm you.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So I'm going to ask if anyone can take a stab at how they would combine rule 1 and rule 4. A little tricky.
Couldn't you technically put the J in front of the NP in number 1? And then maybe do a underhanded arch between the J and the L, so you're not having to move the L maybe from where it's at already.
I see what you're saying. So something like I'm gonna get a different color. Something like this.
Yes.
Do you
But
see?
it might be a little confusing, but that's how I can kind of.
It can definitely be confusing, but if we also think about flipping J and L, which technically in our fourth rule, it does flip. So I can see where you come from that. If I move L over here, now I'm forgetting about M as before L. If I move L over here to take place of J or L is no longer having to go before, or sorry, M is no longer having to go before L. So what we would do instead, and I should have just kind of explained this because it's kind of tricky. J and L flip-flop. We understand that. So I'm going to create two. I'm just going to basically break this up so I don't have to think about them flip-flopping anymore. These are my two options. Think of them as 4A and 4B. I'm going to attach I guess they're kind of becoming worlds. World 1 to A and world 1 to B, because these are two different options. This is just one option. So I'm going to have to think about two different options and separately, basically, because these are different. J and L have different placements. So I'm going to give myself some more room. Eek. And then option B is going to go over here, just to give myself some more room. Now I'm going to look at world 1, because they're technically becoming worlds already. And I'm just going to attach them to what I have so far. So this, or I guess I'll let someone tell me, how would I attach this diagram to world 2 that we have down here?
Sorry, I just have a question. I'm a little bit confused. So just like what you, like a refresher on what you did, it was because you couldn't move L without it impacting M. So you're creating two separate worlds now, like a copy. Okay. I follow.
Yeah, because if we said J and L flip-flop, which technically they do flip-flop in 4, but if we look at what we had written in world 1 and said that J and L flip-flop, then we're starting to mess with what we already had written down, which M has to be before L. And so if I move L over here, now it has no connection to M. It could technically do whatever it wants before M.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split them up, one where L becomes the lead and one where J becomes the lead, basically. And it's going to become a lot easier to combine these together because I'm not going to have to think about them flip-flopping. Before I move on any further, is anyone else confused by this? Because I feel like this part is a little more advanced than normal. And I would say if it's more advanced or more difficult to wrap your head around this, leave it as is. Keep it as you have 2 rules and we're just going to attack rule 1 and then we're going to attack rule 4 and think about where they go. Does anyone have a preference on splitting or 2 rules? I guess I could say.
Wait, splitting?
Splitting?
Wait, sorry, you said splitting or 2 rules, as in like
rule 1, rule 2.
Oh, okay. I don't mind.
Okay. Well, I'll show you what it would look like if you were to split, and then I'll just say if splitting makes no sense to you and it's really difficult to wrap your head around, attack it as rule 1 and rule 2 to make it easy. So, okay, we're going to split then. So we're going to have one where J is the lead in this rule, basically. And we're going to have one where L is the lead. And the reason that we're flipping those two is because J and L can flip between each other. I've just written it out so then I can see who becomes first. If that makes sense.
It's a little simpler to put T and M, plug those into 2, because you could put M in front of the L and then T has to be before the medical doctor, so then T would go in front of that M.
Yeah, that's why I was focusing on the second world first, is because we can see our duplicate variable L, and thankfully L's on the end here, which means we can just, what was I saying? We can,
Like attach it.
yes, attach it. I don't
That's
know
what I
why
was
that's
thinking.
like escaping my mind. So I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller so I have some room. Maybe. Okay. So we're going to attach T and M onto here. And that's really all that we have to do, because technically, let me get this. This box right here is now pushed off further. So again, thinking about that stretchy rubber band or stretchy chain, we've just stretched this box further away from T. So we're still following the rule that T is before N, or yeah, T is before N and P, but we've just stretched it further away than we have it written up here. Does that make sense to people?
Yes.
Awesome.
Sorry, so just to I guess double check or almost review. So instead of just like drawing, if we look at how 1 is, instead of just adding a line like and doing J before N, so what you've done instead is kind of like, I don't want to say reorganize because it's still in the same, it follows all the rules, but you've kind of reorganized it to be an easier straight chain. Like that's what, like, okay, perfect.
Yeah, yeah. Because if I had put, well, we'll talk about J coming first in that first world, because that's going to be a little bit different, a little bit more difficult than the second world, because the second world is really nice. It's just a straight chain. This is our order, basically. And the first world is going to be a little different. But the main thing I want to make sure that people can see is we've basically done this. We've taken our L, P, N, J chain, and we've deleted this part because we've moved it down further. So, okay. So now we've got that done in the second world. Don't have to worry about it anymore. Now we have to think about this first world, though, where J becomes first instead of L. So when I have this world here, J, P, N, L, how could I combine my first world with, oh, I got two for world ones. How can I combine this rule with this diagram? It's a little tricky.
So we're combining 1, well, I guess 1 and 1, just to
Yeah.
double, okay.
Basically.
Yeah, because it is tricky. So I was like, did I hear that? Okay.
Does anyone want to take a stab?
Like, I feel like I know we have to add M and T, but it's just like where, so that it's not going against the rules. So I'm trying to read the rules.
And so it's easy to read, because while we want to combine these rules, we're combining them so they're easier for us to read and answer the questions. So you don't want to make it super confusing for yourself. So, okay, we'll just go into this because this is a little tricky. So when you're lost on how to combine rules, like we can obviously see N and P are duplicating itself. We can obviously combine them because we've got duplicates. If it's too confusing for you, leave it as is. Say that this is your world 1, are these two diagrams. And as I like look at my spots that they can go in, I can just kind of diagram them out. The other thing that you can do is you can just start taking it piece by piece and attaching it. So I'm going to take my T. I know that T has to be before N and P, which I have down here. So I'm just going to attach T before N and P. I'm actually going to kind of like move my stuff around so it's a little easy to read. Are we with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. So I've attached T, don't have to worry about T anymore. Now I'm gonna look at M. I know that M has to come after T, so I can just attach M after T. Don't have to worry about M. But I also know that M has to come before L. And I have an L here. So what I can do is I can stretch this band, this connector, pull L out just a little bit to make it a little easier for me to read. And I can attach L to both of those. It's getting a little messy.
Yeah, what the hell?
I understand.
Oh my gosh, I thought I was muted. I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. It's a
I'm
little,
just trying
it's
to
a lot
follow
messier
and
compared to World 2. World 2 is straightforward. We can see that very clearly. But World 1 is a mess.
yeah, because I'm trying to think like if I'm trying to visually follow the rules and see what I've drawn, how can I like understand it?
Yes. So I'll teach you how to read this diagram here. And I'll teach you my trick too. So this is what I would call like a tree diagram game. We don't necessarily need certain spots, and it's not telling me like P is in spot 3 or 4 or something like that. So technically, we don't need any of these spots to attack this game, but it is a lot easier to read your diagram if you need to use these spots. The reason why I say you don't need to is because if we read this correctly, we can actually figure out some of the spots that they go in. And that's what I do when I have these tree diagrams like this, where I have things spouting off of each other. We are sharks, we don't turn around. So what we figure out first is who can go first, who can go last. So based off of this diagram, world number 1, who can tell me or who can guess who would go, who has the possibility of going number 1?
Teacher.
Teacher? Who else could go number 1?
The judge.
Yeah, because nothing's coming before it. So if we're trying to figure out who could be the first, we're looking at those variables that have nothing before it. No variable is required to go before teacher or judge. So you know that these 2 variables are the only ones that could be in that first spot.
Got it.
Are we good with that?
Yes.
So now that we figured out that they could be in the first spot, we're going to see how many variables have to come after them. And we're going to see then what is the latest that they could go. So for example, I'll show you teacher and let you try judge. So the teacher has how many spots after it? So I'm starting here. This is my first point. I have 2 paths I can take basically. I can go, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, really quick question. I guess it has to do more with like the time that we are given with LSAT. Would it make sense if I like at the side did write like a little type of list that was like T can be between like 1 and X and like, I don't know, 5, or this can be between this and this? Or do you think it's going to be a bit of a waste of time? Or like, do you think that like, I'm just worried about getting a bit confused. And I feel like if I start color coding things, that'll be a waste of time as well.
Oh
So I'm just unsure like what you would recommend.
Not color code things.
Yeah, exactly.
Bring colored stuff onto your test. I literally think you are only allowed a black, maybe a blue and red pen.
Oh,
what
okay.
we're gonna do here is you're getting a little far ahead of me, but
Okay, then never mind.
How many variables have to come after T, and then I'm gonna put like a 1, 2, 3 or something like that.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
So the range is T can go between 1 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to figure out how many have to come after T, we're going to follow our dashes until we can't go forward anymore. So if I'm going on this route, my M route, I'm hitting M, so that's 1 variable. I'm hitting L, that's 2 variables. So 2 variables have to come after T if I take this route. If I go back to my checkpoint and I take my other path, I hit P and N, and then I hit L again. I've already counted L. I'm not going to recount L. So 4 variables have to come after T. which means I have to make sure that I have 4 spaces after T. And if I'm looking at my chart, that would mean that the latest T can go is 2 to allow those 4 spaces. So I can go T is between 1 and 2. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Awesome. Who wants to try to figure out what the latest J can go?
I can try. So the latest you said, oh yeah, because we did the earliest. The earliest is 1, and the latest is, so I would count P and N.
Right, because we're
And
following that path.
yeah, and L. So that's 3 variables. So J can be 1 or 1 to 3.
Yeah, so we just have to make sure that 3 spaces are after J, which would put it at 3. So J can go anywhere between 1 and 3. So J could go 2. That leaves enough space for P, N, and L. So we figured out who can go first and their ranges. Now we got to go on the other end and think about who can go last. Who can go last?
L.
Yeah, only L. No one else has nothing after it. L is the only one that can go last. And it can't go earlier than anything either, because all of my variables, I've used all my variables, right? Yeah, all of my variables come before L. So L is the only one that is allowed to go last in this case.
I have a question. I have
Yes.
a question. So, because you said L is the, oh wait, the,
In
sorry.
that world, sorry, I should specify. In
Oh,
world
oh,
one.
I didn't even, yeah, but okay. So in that world, sorry, you said L can only go last, or okay, perfect. That's what I, okay.
Yeah. Because
I thought I misunderstood you.
Yeah, so the way that we know that L is the only one that can go last is if you look at your variables, there's no other variable that has nothing after it. Like no one's required to come after another variable except L. L is the only one with like, that's a dead end.
Okay. Would it also be, because the way I thought of it was because like with all the other, like there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables before L, so it would have to be last as well. Like all of those have to come before L.
Yeah, that's another way of looking at it. Yeah. Anyone have questions on that? Awesome. Generally, I only do the first and the last variables. That kind of gets me a general sense of the graph that we're looking at. And given we only have 5 questions, I wouldn't say you necessarily need to do the other variables. You totally can do M and our P and N if you wanted to, and you would figure out the same way. How many variables have to go before M? How many variables have to go after N? And that's how you're going to find their ranges. The other thing that you can do is by using or figuring out the ranges that you have, you can start diagramming a little bit. So for example, I'll do a little bit of diagramming for sake of time. We know L is going to be 6, so we can place L in our 6th spot here. T only has 1 of 2 spots. And that way, when I go into my questions, if I absolutely need to diagram, or if I'm having a hard time picturing something, I can use one of these like little templates and I can scribble in some stuff if I need to. But generally, questions that happen on this kind of game where we have these tree diagrams, they're going to ask you how many people can go on spot 3, what's the latest T can go. And having an idea of their ranges is really helpful, because I can go, how many people can be in spot 1? I'm only seeing 2 variables that have that range in them. How many people can be in spot 4? I really only have 2 variables, or sorry, I guess 3 variables that could go in that range. So, well, I guess, no, yeah. So that's supposed to be helpful. But again, if this is really difficult for you to read, I think this is one of the more difficult games on the LSAT because it's much more abstract than anything else. So if it becomes difficult to read, then you can just start diagramming based on what you have, your massive rule, basically. So you want to have questions on the diagram?
So is there a reason why you, I don't know if I missed this, but is there a reason why you decided not to place J? Is it because it can go in 3 spots, or like why you, I know you said you usually stick to the first and last. Is that really just the only reason why?
No, I mean, you could start planning out J. The only reason why, I mean, I guess you could if I wanted to. J is between 1 and 3, so J is going to be in 2 or 3 here, 1 or 3 here. The only reason why I picked on L was because, one, we know where L is. It's in that 6th spot. And I picked on T because I only have 2 spots that it could go in. It's really easy to make another diagram and have those 2 spots and not have to worry about it. J, then you start having 3 spots, and then you have to think about where it can go in 1 and 2.
Yeah.
It cascades into like a domino effect of where your variables can go, which is totally fine. I just didn't feel like doing it for sake of time right now.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, and then I'm gonna put our second diagram here too, because this second world is just completed already. There's no other way of doing it. So I'm just gonna stick that in there. Not worry about it. A lot easier to read. Okay, so let's do like 2 questions. Given that you have the diagram and the tools necessary if you need to diagram out the rest of the world, I am confident that everyone can answer the questions with relative ease, or at least get to the correct answer choice in the end. So I'm not going to spend too much time on questions. So let's do a couple of them. Let's do number 2. I'm gonna give y'all a couple of minutes to go over number 2, or a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds, because it shouldn't be too hard. Does anyone have an answer?
I can share my answer. I picked A. And typically in these questions, because it could be A or L, they're not, I mean, like the judges J or L, they're not going to put both. They're going to do like one or the other.
Right. So because in this case, we only have J or L as our 6th one. No other one can be in our 6th spot. It's going to have one or the other. If you have a diagram where you have M in the 6th spot or something, and then you get stuck between A and B, that should be a red flag that something's wrong with your diagram. You've missed something, you've misdiagrammed it, you've misinterpreted a rule or something. We only have one answer choice all the time. So yeah, this is something where I would say I could look at my diagram, go, it's J or L, not even have to spend time B, C, D, or E, because I know it's either J or L. Any questions on that one? Okay. Let's go. I want to do one of these. Let's do this one. Does anyone have an answer that they like?
I'm gonna say 4 based off of the diagram because we know that it can only go 2 places, so there's only gonna be 4 left over.
Yeah. Really helpful to figure out these ranges, especially when you have something like this, because you can easily look at that and go, I have 6 variables. The latest T can go is 2, minimum is 4 based on math. But yeah, based on your diagrams as well. So yeah, that's going to be our answer. And then let's do this one and then we'll call it quits.
Or I
Yeah.
can, I think the answer is D, that the nurses have to be 4, because, well, first it's like they're saying what has to be true. So like this has to be true because you need, well, first like N and P are next, like have to stay close to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just go with that answer again because it's like a must be true. So that's like what is 100% certain is that if P is 5th, then the other one has to be 4th because only L and J can be 6th is what I would say.
Yeah, 100% correct. So this is a must be true. Like you said, it's 100% has to be true all the time. So what we can do is we go P is evaluated 5th. I can see that pretty clearly here because I've got it written out. So I can put P in 5 and in 4. However, actually, does that help evaluate it? No. So J is evaluated 3rd. I have J evaluated 6th. So that one time where it's not in there proves that it cannot 100% be true. So I can immediately eliminate A. Lawyers are evaluated 6th. I already talked about that J has to go in 6th. I can eliminate that. M is evaluated 2nd. I do have that here. So I'm going to keep it open. N is 4th. Do have that happening. And T is 1st. I do have that happening. So this is a good example of must be true, has to be true all the time. And even though we see it in one diagram, it could be that now I have C, D, and E happening in that diagram. So we're gonna have to figure out another combination that they have, which we can figure out using this method or diagramming it out up here. I can shift P and N up here, and I can put M here, and I can see that T does not have to be 1st. And M does not have to be 2nd because we can flip between J.
So, sorry, would you say that like when we have, you feel like there might be multiple answers, like let's say you're doing this question, you're at like C, D, and E. So a good way to go then is by like trying to prove them wrong. If that makes any sense? Okay.
Yeah, because a must be true has to be true 100% of the time. So if I have a diagram where J is actually evaluated 4th and not 3rd, that means that that one valid diagram proves that it does not have to be 100% true that J is in 3rd. Because I have 1% of the time where J is in, I think I said, what did I say, 4th or something like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I guess my only issue was if one time I didn't have like my world or diagram correctly going off of an incorrect diagram, it's kind of hard to know what answer choices are right. So this was helpful to know how to specifically chain them together when I'm confused.
Yeah, so it's really important to practice those diagrams because that's what students struggle with a lot is feeling confident that they do have the correct diagrams because I think they might have missed something. The only time will you have, I'll say this, if you have missed something, it means that you either have more than one answer choices that you like or you hate all of them. That's a clear indicator that you've missed something. Yeah, I think that's really the only time where you're going to have that clear indicator. And then let's say I eliminated E, but I'm still stuck between C and D. Well, I'm going to pick on one of them and say, let's say I'm going to pick on my medical doctors as second. I might have missed something in my rules, or I've misdiagrammed something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new diagram and unfortunately test them out. So I'm going to say, does it have to be true that medical doctors are second? To prove that it does not have to be true, or that it has to be true, I'm going to say, like we said earlier, I'm going to try to prove it wrong. So I'm going to say M is in first. If I can create a valid diagram based off of my rules, that means it does not have to be true.
Mhm. Makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I guess sometimes I get confused of must be true and could be true, because I've had a question where I'm like, this can happen for all of the answers. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And it's like, oh, it has to only specifically be
Yes.
one.
It is very important to keep track of the difference between the two. Those are the two most common questions that you're going to get on this test,
Mhm.
for logic games at least. Two most common: what must be true, what could be true. Distinguish those. Think about how flexible could be true sounds. It's a possibility. It's an instance. Think about how harsh must be true sounds. You're telling me that N has to go fourth. I'm going to try to disprove that. If I can't, then I have to go, yeah, you're right, N has to go fourth. So think about how the tone of those language that is.
I need to go back to my weak and strong analysis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Does anyone have any other questions before we call it quits today? All right. Well, that is the game. Well, I mean, kind of. I have faith you guys can answer the rest of the questions that we did not go over today. I think there were like maybe 2 that we didn't go over. But if you have questions on that, let me know. Otherwise, have a good night.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your help. And I
Thank
was wondering, are
you.
you going to send the recording out to the email?
Yes. So
Okay, perfect.
I'm depending on, I'm getting hungry, so I'm gonna go make dinner and then send it out when I get back.
Awesome.
But I try to send them out within 24 hours at the very latest. So,
Perfect. Thank you again.
all right, no problem. See you guys later. Bye.
Bye.
Good
Thank
night.
you.